Shane Beamer against Mark Stoops. This series has all of a sudden, in the last, say, year and a half or so, this series has all of a sudden gotten a lot of extra juice, a lot of extra venom, if you will, because of the relationship between these two coaches. Let me take you back, guys, to last year, last summer in particular. Shane Beamer makes waves on social media, right, with the Turn My Swag On sunglasses video that got millions of views on social media, took the world by storm, the college football world at least. Not even 24 hours later, Mark Stoops goes on record talking about, we build a culture, not a climate, right? Anybody can put on a pair of stupid sunglasses and dance around and think they're changing a culture. And of course, I'm paraphrasing Mark Stoops' comments. So that was a big talking point and a big storyline going into last year's game. Well, we all recall what happened last year in Lexington. Gamecocks won at Kroger Field for the first time in a decade. And in the postgame, in the locker room, Shane Beamer was quick to point out those comments and say he talked about our culture, dancing around in stupid sunglasses, and Shane Beamer proceeded to put those quote-unquote stupid sunglasses on and practically dance on the grave of Mark Stoops and Kentucky. Then we go to the spring when Shane Beamer made an appearance on Bussin' with the Boys, the podcast affiliated with Barstool Sports. And he was asked by the Bussin' with the Boys guys, is there a coach out there in the SEC on your schedule who would you most want to fight? Anybody out there you want to fight? And Shane Beamer, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but made it clear that there is a coach out there. There is a coach that's on the schedule that he'd like to go mano-a-mano with. And I think it's a safe assumption to say that guy is Mark Stoops. Bottom line, guys, is this. These two coaches despise each other. These two gentlemen hate each other. And I am just fascinated to see. We've heard all week about motivation factor. Is Kentucky going to be motivated in this football game? And I've been surprised how much of a talking point that's been. Because if Kentucky's football team cannot get up for their head coach, if Kentucky's football team cannot rally around their head football coach after the things that Shane Beamer has said over the last year or so and done, then Kentucky's players do not care about Mark Stoops. Bottom line. Because this game is personal for both of these head coaches. Neither team should lack motivation. Neither team should lack want to. And I'm just really curious to see, do we see any fireworks in pregame? Do we see any fireworks in postgame in the handshake? Heck, we just saw Eli Drinkwitz and Josh Heupel have a bit of an exchange. Do we see something similar in this ball game? Because one thing is for certain, despite what they may say, Mark Stoops earlier this week trying to deflect and say, no, that people just make that up. There's nothing there. These two head coaches, in Shane Beamer and Mark Stoops, despise one another. And I think the winner in this ball game, I got a funny feeling the winner's going to let you know about it. They're going to let us all know about it, how they feel about the opposite side. So some extra venom added to this South Carolina series. Dare I say this South Carolina-Kentucky rivalry because of the relationship between these two head coaches. Now, as I've mentioned all week, guys, I think it's a shootout. I've taken the over in this ball game. You look at the offensive side for South Carolina. The Gamecocks, week after week after week, have called on Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette to, for lack of a better way of putting it, bail them out time and time again. Where the defense is not able to stand up and stand tall. Hey, we need you guys to be not just good, but elite. Can Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette and that duo do it again? Because to be fair, earlier this season, this team was called a one-man show, a one-trick pony. I won't go that far because there's a couple pieces, but there's only a couple. And so it's in the passing game, for the most part, it's Spencer Rattler and it's Xavier Legette. And if one of those two guys doesn't ball out, certainly if both, but if even just one of those two guys doesn't ball out, South Carolina does not win, in my opinion. Can you lean on them yet again? Can Spencer Rattler, who has been elite on the home field, you can question some of the competition. That's fair. That's fine, right? Furman, Mississippi State, Jacksonville State, Vanderbilt, and then, of course, the Florida game. So is this his stiffest test on the home field at 8? Maybe so. Maybe you could say that. But you need the best version of Spencer Rattler yet again. And Xavier Legette, I'm not saying he's got to go for over 200 yards, but he's got to be special. He's got to be special for South Carolina. For this Gamecocks offense to operate at peak optimal capacity, he's got to be special, as does Spencer Rattler. Both those guys have to ball out. Can South Carolina lean on that duo once again? The battle of the running games taking place as well on Saturday night, guys. Mario Anderson against Ray Davis. This is one that's been sort of a talking point over the last 24, 36 hours, what have you. Of course, I went on record, our position unit comparisons. I gave Kentucky the nod. Some in the Anderson circle, I think, aren't too thrilled with that. I stand on business, though, and I stand on that. I think Kentucky, when you look at the running back room, you look at Ray Davis, I do give Kentucky the nod, the slight edge at the running back position. But when you talk running game, going to be a big part of this football game. Both running back rooms, I think, can have success. Kentucky's got a little bit more depth. Mario Anderson's been really good of late. But what do the big uglies do? Which group of big uglies is more consistent? Because both of these teams have had their issues. For a couple games there, Kentucky's running the football well, right? Ray Davis had that 240-yard game against Florida earlier the year. And it's not like he's been bad of late, but the running game hasn't been the force that it once was. Meanwhile, for South Carolina, you're getting more out of the running game against Jacksonville State, against Vanderbilt. But the running game's been somewhat hit or miss, right? I think fans will point to games against Mizzou and Tennessee and Texas A&M, but a lot of those yards came in trash time. Let's call it for what it is, right? A lot of garbage time yards there, but still, Mario Anderson been very, very good with the offensive line protection, the offensive line help that he's had at his disposal. I'm excited to see which running game will thrive on Saturday night, because it's two capable groups, and I probably trust Kentucky's more because I think their offense is built more around running the football. But it's a pair of, on the line of scrimmage, both offensive lines have been inconsistent, and neither defensive line has been all that great at rushing the quarterback. And neither defensive line, they're both very comparable, right? Neither's elite at stopping the run. So the battle of the running games. And again, guys, like I mentioned, I stand on business. I said what I said. Lot in the Anderson circle are not too thrilled on social media, in case you haven't noticed. I'm curious. Is Mario Anderson running with a little extra edge on Saturday night? Curious to see that. Guys, I mentioned the passing game. Tight end is something. That was a fun conversation with South Carolina. The emergence of Joshua Simon, I think, has been really interesting and really fun to watch. Joshua Simon, guys, is just a physical specimen. And I'm surprised, honestly, how long it took for him to become more involved in the offensive attack. I think the injury to Trey Knox has put more pressure on him. And, hey, pressure makes diamonds. He's made the most of it. I wonder how much more do we see Joshua Simon. Trey Knox should be good to go from what we've heard from Shane Beamer on Saturday night. Simon is a guy that is a matchup nightmare for opposing defenses. I'm curious, again, how they use him. You're looking for more out of the passing game. You need someone else to help Xavier Legette. I know we feel good about what Omega Blake can be, what Amarian Brown can be, what he can do, but Joshua Simon, I think, has been putting together some nice performances of late. Maybe, just maybe, he's more involved and becomes a bigger part of this offense. Switching sides of the football, guys. The South Carolina defense. coming off their best game of the season by far. The question is this: was the Vandy performance a one-off, or are there real signs of improvement for the South Carolina defense? Like, did South Carolina find something in that ball game, right? I tend to think a lot of the success had to do with the opponent, to be fair. I tend to think a lot of the success had to do with who you were playing. But, as I've mentioned before, the momentum built and the confidence gained, you can't put a price tag on that. So all of a sudden, do we see South Carolina capitalizing on that? You know, flying around a little bit differently, playing with, dare I say, a little bit of a different motor. Do we see that on Saturday night, or does it revert back to what we saw in even the Jacksonville State game and certainly the rest of SEC play? Sticking with the Gamecocks defense, guys, I'm just curious what South Carolina does to pressure Devin Leary, right? Because this is going to be a game where I think you need to be aggressive defensively. And Devin Leary, he's been better of late, but he hasn't been great by any means, right? Devin Leary has not lived up to the preseason hype and expectations, has not been the dude that many folks thought he would be in this Liam Cohen system and this Liam Cohen offensive attack. Do we see South Carolina send more than 4? Do we see them, you know, the scheme has changed a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Do we see that continue? How do the Gamecocks get after Devin Leary? Because he's got the weapons. He's got the weapons to work with. Got a nice tight end in Jordan Dingle. Got Barryon Brown on the outside at wide receiver. Got Dane Key at wide receiver on the outside. Kentucky has got the weapons to score and score a lot. You got to get pressure on Devin Leary. I expect South Carolina to load up the box, to slow down the run. Do we see them sending additional pressure? Speaking of the passing game, guys, again, South Carolina secondary looking good last week, but that was one game. That was against Vandy. Just the week prior, Jacksonville State went up and down the field on this defense. Can guys like Marcellus Dial, O'Donnell Fortune, Nicky Manwari, DQ Smith, the entire secondary, Keenan Nelson Jr. gaining some confidence, can those guys not be elite? I expect Kentucky's going to get theirs. Can they limit the explosive plays? Can you limit the explosives? This is going to be a storyline for both defenses. Whichever defense does a better job of limiting those big-time explosive plays, those plays over the top, I'd almost argue, guys, whichever secondary makes more big plays, pass deflections, turnovers, what have you, that's who's going to win the football game. Because the big plays are going to be there. You look at both secondaries, guys, neither secondary is really all that good. Let's call it for what it is. South Carolina has been abysmal all season long, been exposed down the field. I'm not letting the Vandy game make me lose sight of what this defense is. I think Kentucky's going to take their shots. I think they're going to go downfield. The question is, when they do, not if, but when they do, can South Carolina secondary buckle down and have one of their better performances of the season? Guys, we saw South Carolina last weekend get a blocked punt, scoop and score. I mentioned Keenan Nelson Jr. He was the man on the block, the scoop, and the score. And it's games like these where we've seen special teams over the last 2+ seasons show up, show out, be a difference maker for South Carolina. Maybe in a game in which you're an underdog, you're playing a team that top to bottom is better than you. How do you pull an upset? You make a game-changing play in the special teams facet. Does the Beamer ball magic continue? You know, before that block punt, we saw South Carolina get close time and time again, and they just weren't quite getting there for whatever reason. Finally, you broke the seal against Vandy. Is it a situation in which those come in bunches? Do we see South Carolina attack on special teams like we're so accustomed to seeing? And do we see the Gamecocks make that that game-changing special teams play that we have become so accustomed to seeing over the last 2+ years. Finally, guys, the intangibles are always fascinating in college football, and there's something that you have to account for them, right? You cannot talk about a college football game without talking about the intangibles because these are 18 to 22-year-old college athletes, right? They're swayed by things like their girlfriend breaking up with them, what time the game is played, right? Where it's played. Like, those things matter. Momentum, positive or negative. Those things matter. So you look at the intangibles in this football game, guys. Kentucky's lost 4 of 5, just got beat up by Alabama. South Carolina winners of back-to-back games. I don't care who the opponents were. The Gamecocks are remembering what it feels like to win, gaining confidence from that. Also, you've got Darude in town. I know that feels silly to mention, but it matters. It matters. Darude's in town, right? You got bowl eligibility on the line. South Carolina scratching and clawing and fighting for their postseason lives. Night game, the atmosphere, the environment, the crowd. I'd imagine I'll be stunned if it's not a sellout. The impact of Gamecock Nation, guys, we've seen it before. It was around this time last year. We saw South Carolina take down Tennessee at Williams-Brice Stadium. Same exact kickoff time and everything. We felt the impact of Williams-Brice Stadium on that night. In a scenario in which you could argue Kentucky's the better football team. I mean, guys, they're favored on the road at night. You're not favored at Willie B at night unless you are the better team, at least on paper. Do the intangibles push South Carolina over the top yet again and give them the victory?